Hey. There are a couple of funny moments in it.
Well, I was going to say, that's something I was going to mention. I do actually think this movie is quite funny. I guess I just want to start by saying I love this film. And it holds a special place for me, Lodge, because it's the first film of yours that I saw before I'd kind of gone back and seen Clean Shaven and Claire Dillon, so it kind of holds a very special place. So I'm particularly happy about the restoration and the life that it will have for years to come. And Damian, you're so damn good in this, and I'd be you know. I'd be lying if I didn't say that. I don't want to use the word steal, but I definitely drew inspiration for a particular film that I did, which we can talk about later because it's not about me. Yeah, it's truly special. The first sort of, I guess, broad question that I had, I want to talk a bit about the kind of technical aspect of the restoration, but just on a purely emotional level for the both of you. Like, what does it feel like to revisit it now? Is there a detachment? Do you feel removed from it? Do you feel, joking aside, do you still like it? Do you still like? What does it feel like to revisit it now and to see it again on the big screen?
Are you going to do that all night? Well, you've been watching it, because you've been part of the remastering. I haven't seen it for a while. And it was always a personal movie for me, for obvious reasons. I'm very connected to this film in terms of my screen time. And I think it's exquisite to see it again, actually, and I love the very subtle turns all the way through it. I'd forgotten about the menace that exists in it, alongside the thriller element. I had forgotten the beautiful, just quite how exquisitely Lodge mirrors right at the end. When he's there with Little Miss Sunshine at the end, mirroring his own experience with his daughter. There were lots of conversations at the time about whether he had invented the whole thing in his mind. I think Lodge and I always agreed, well, Lodge wrote it, and it was always clear that it had actually happened, it was real. And that heart-stopping moment where you think he's going to abduct this lady's child and then doesn't is just done quietly in a nuanced, subtle but devastatingly effective way at the end. You made an amazing film. You made an amazing film, and I feel very lucky to see it again.
I just wanted to say that I think we made the film, Damian, with a lot of people too.
Well, that's kind. It was, when I first got this script, I looked at it and I went, hell yes, that's got awards written all over it. That is like the greatest hits of, behavioral problems, and I'm going to go to town with this. It's fantastic. And I thought, and I wasn't sure. I had to read it and reread it. I said, but does this add up to more than that? And then Lodge came to stay with me for 2 days in London. He said, if we're going to do this, I'm going to come and stay with you for 2 days over a weekend, and we're going to workshop this together in your house. I said, sure, I love that. No one would usually take the time. He flew to London, and we spent 2 days, and at the end of that, I knew exactly that I was going to make this film, and that the narrative drive was absolutely intact, and then it wasn't going to be a put on the hump, develop the limp. you know, grow the hairy mole on the face. It was going to be nuanced and subtle and directed beautifully. So, yeah, and this is the first time I've come back to it in a long while.
Feels good.
Does feel good, yeah.
Lodge, can you just talk a little bit about the technical aspect of, during the restoration, did you have, let's say, urges to even go re-edit, or, you know, how did it feel like being in an editing room, or talk a bit about that?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think it's a really interesting question. I was very fortunate that Kristina Boden, who I've worked with, is a wonderful editor. She cut Claire Dolan.
Yeah.
And my episodes of The Girlfriend Experience, both seasons, that we supervised the restoration, remastering together. And we were discussing Claire Dolan because we'd like to remaster that if I can find the money to do it. And we were talking about would we go in and re-edit it or not. And I think for me, it's a really interesting question. I think it extends to not only to film, but to other mediums of art. You know, how much you go in when you're revisiting a work, and if you're restoring it or cleaning it up or changing it, how much you go in and change something that was documented at a specific period. There were some things that I wanted to do, pretty minor, I think, in the grand scheme of things, with Keane, and more actually about use of music, which is very, very minimal. But I decided at the end not to do it because I felt that I stand by it. You know, I made this film when I made it 2004. It's a document of that period. And although I can go in and deal with color balancing and shaping the light a little bit in the remastering, I didn't want to move away from that intent of what it really was. And you know, even if now I look back and go like, oh, I could see areas, even with other films, you know, like when I watched Clean Shaven, I only watch a film usually once with an audience. It's not a steadfast rule, but usually once. And then I move on until I remaster it. So I watched Clean Shaven recently because it's being re-released in Japan. I felt like, ooh, I could really re-edit this. I could really go in and re-edit, and I hope I'm not being vain, but I think actually kind of improve some areas of it. But I thought that's kind of not right.
Let it lie, yeah, in that way.
You know, that I have to look back, and that was a period when I was, with Clean Shaven, a very young filmmaker starting, and that's a document of that time. So to go back years later and re-edit it, I think wouldn't be true to the period, and yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah. Damian, I want to talk, I'm very interested in some of the hardships of this part, and because you do it so well. There's a few I want to talk about, but one I want to specifically talk about is voicing interior thoughts. Well, actually, hold on. I want to start here. The feeling of the camera almost kind of being like a shadow, and had a sort of, I assume, you know, you're sort of dancing with it, you know, or treating it like a friend or something, you know. So how did that feel? The kind of dance with the camera and also voicing interior thoughts on screen. You know, what would normally be in other movies, I feel like, done with a voiceover, you know what I mean? And then the actor can sort of just live and breathe, and then, but having to sort of do that yourself, I imagine for me that would be difficult to accomplish the way you did.
That was one of the hardest things to overcome and get right, and not feel self-conscious about doing. Actually, Lodge was always asking me, you just take it down, take it down, take it down, take it down. Let's get it as, wherever you can, get it just down to a whisper. So it's as internal and as intimate as possible. The advantage of the whisper, or the talking, right from the very beginning, which you feel is an expression of internal thoughts, is that then as the audience becomes aware that he's not well, it becomes a man talking to himself. So it serves a dual purpose in that respect. In terms of the camera, John Foster was our brilliant, steady-handed cinematographer, operator, and it was both those things. It became a friend, and I enjoyed the dance, actually. And it's an odd thing that actors have to do, which you'll appreciate simultaneously, is immerse yourself entirely in an alternative reality and be in that world imaginatively, entirely, whilst at the same time being aware of the dance with a camera. So you are trying to do two things at once all the time. And initially, of course, yeah, it felt intrusive. John had to figure out where the camera was going to be. It feels utterly spontaneous, the whole thing. That's only because we rehearsed every single camera move and every scene for a long time before we shot it. He only had 4-minute films in a lighter camera. So, and there were a couple of scenes which you remember ran to 3:57, 3:58, and we're thinking, oh fuck, we're not going to get it in time. And it's been a great take, and we've been rehearsing it for 2 hours, and now it's going to be too slow, and we're not going to. It's going to be unusable. But so John had to learn the scenes on the day, and learn when to go, when not to go, when to go, when not to go, and. That was an enormous task for him, wasn't it, Lodge, that he rose to, sometimes struggled with, but rose to it incredibly, right, over the course of the movie.
There's only all the coverage in the film. It's one shot per scene. That's it. All the editing is in camera, was worked out beforehand, and the only edits are jump cuts, really, to try to unsettle the character, unsettle the pace, unsettle the audience too. So it was.
I remember teasing you halfway through. It's going, one establishing shot, Lodge. Come on, pull back. Just one wide, and then let's punch it. One. Give me one.
There is a bus station.
Yeah.
But it's true. I mean, I think because a lot of actors too have this like sort of silly attitude sometimes. Like, well, I'm going to have a performance and it's up to the camera to catch it, and I think it's kind of silly. And I think the way you sort of work with the camera, like you need it to capture the performance, and it's very unselfish and beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, do you think, Laj? Do you think, just as a kind of fun hypothetical, do you think you can make this movie now? I think you can. I think it's sort of. I mean, I think that Keane is sort of timeless in that way. I mean, besides the fact that Penn Station also basically looks the same than it does now. But
and so does Damian.
That's right. You do. You look fantastic.
We can all agree on that.
Yeah.
So shall we?
Just do it again. Not a sequel. Just do it.
I'm here for one more day, and so
No. Do you think? I think it can. That's all. That's my opinion.
I have to say, one of the three things I took from it when I was restoring it, watching it, and I hadn't seen it since 2005, maybe, I think, so it had been some time, and one, that it felt still very much of the moment. It felt that this could take place in New York City. Two, I was still really struck by just how electric and alive Damian's performances. And I also think that Abigail's performance, who plays Kira, the young girl, is just so remarkable. She's so present. Like you just see her listening, and this information, you can see her responding to it without like really being completely present. And Amy Ryan gave this absolutely beautifully nuanced performance in it. And I was really taken, as an audience member and as a filmmaker, one of the most important things for me is just life in front of a camera. Like, I don't know where it's gonna go. Like, I wanna be where it's dangerous in some way. You have no idea what's gonna happen. And I think watching this, that's really what I felt. Again, like, I had no idea what was, even though obviously I knew, but it felt alive, it felt on edge, it felt somewhat dangerous. And the third thing I thought was, you know, I shot a lot, I wrote a lot of this and shot, well, I wrote it all in Port Authority. I would go around with those interior monologues, walking in Port Authority from one gate to another, mumbling out the words. I'm sure people thought that I was crazy. And working it out, and then going into the street towards the Lincoln Tunnel and walking that area, going over into New Jersey, into Bergen County in those motels, and figuring it all out to try to capture the energy. But I wanted to shoot in live environments, and then I wanted to shoot one shot per scene. And Steven Soderbergh, the executive producer, was like, "Go do it. It sounds amazing. Go do it." But a lot of my friends and colleagues were like, "That's totally insane what you're going to do. I mean, it's really crazy." And watching I'm still young, but I was younger then, and I thought then at that period I was like, "Of course I'm going to do it. Like, there's no, I'm just doing it. Like, that's it." But when I watched it now, it was like, you were totally crazy. Like, that's insane. But at the same time, what I want to say is that I think these films at this budget level, these small films, I mean, Damian mentioned the 90s and independent cinema and all that. I still think great small work outside the commercial arena is being made today, and companies, people like Ryan and companies like Grasshopper are instrumental in getting it to audiences, and there is an audience for it. But I think these are the kinds of films to take risks, right? To really go out and do it. Like, you know, so you say, would I go out and make it? I probably wouldn't, but I would encourage somebody else to get it.
It's sort of another thing that I kind of find wild about this is a lead character that is not only essentially going through a psychotic break, you know, in real time, but one that only interacts with strangers for an entire film. There's no context of, let's say, you know, a family member or anything to sort of give backstory to this kind of to that kind of character, and that's sort of a why, you know, I think it makes it feel, I think, like a documentary in that way. You know, you're sort of living it with Damian, and it's not necessarily a question, but it's just something that I noticed that I think is pretty remarkable.
Well, I think Damian mentioned before that we decided very early on that Keane had a daughter and that she was abducted, because you can't act, and you can't, please correct me if I'm wrong, but you can't act ambiguity, and you know, you have to know on some level, and you certainly can't direct it either. So we chose that she did have a daughter, but I wanted to express it through the behavior, through his behavior. I think if you look at the character and how he interacts with Kira, in his behavior, to me it's apparent he's a parent because of the patience that he takes with the child. And in the writing that I do, I really I mean, it's just for myself, and there's no right or wrong way, but I tend to shy away from exposition.
Yeah. And
I'm not particularly interested in when characters explain their emotional life through dialogue. As an audience member, honestly, I kind of switch off, and I'll go watch a film with a friend, and somebody will say, "What did they say?" And I have no idea, because I've just stopped paying attention. But as a writer, I just find it really, I'm just not interested in that. What I'm interested in more is from a more voyeuristic level, just trying to watch people and see how they behave and what the context is. It gives clues to what perhaps they might want or what they're trying to communicate, even if they're aware of it themselves. And so I find that then that's what I try to write in most characters, and I think it continues into, you know, television work, like in The Girlfriend Experience. And the characters then, I think, they become, for me, more interesting, because you're trying to figure out who they really are. Like in real life, people just don't reveal themselves to you. You have to go really pay attention to the small cues that they're giving behaviorally, and of course, yes, through their dialogue also, as I'm sure every analyst will say, but I think that that's really, for me, what's fascinating. And so that's what I try to write, and to try to draw an audience in, that you have to determine for yourself, you know, what's going on, who this character really is.
Damian, do you, a moment that I particularly like is in the ice skating rink when you sort of, like, I think as the audience, you sort of forget about his psychosis, you know, because he's how he is with Kira, and the sort of moment where you sort of feel like he's had a cap on it for so long, and then it just needs to come out again, you know, when he sort of explodes more or less on the strangers. Was that another difficult, you know, to sort of play with the different levels of that and letting it come out, letting just the different, you know, I forgot about that and in that moment, and I thought you did such a sort of great job of sort of painting all like that graph of this person.
Yeah, thank you. It was enjoyable. Those moments were enjoyable. It was an opportunity to lean into what we've been discussing. You know, that he had been a good parent, and had this terrible moment. He also has more money than everyone else in the film, which is interesting. And you learn that as you're going along. So he's in the welfare motel, but he's always got a bit of cash to get some coke or give $100. And we also talked about that. You know, who was this guy really? A middle-class, stable guy with a house whose life unraveled, you know, quickly over a short period of time because of this dreadful, dreadful thing that happened. You know, maybe it started with the divorce, you know, which we have to assume is real. Maybe got into some debt, didn't have a house, he lost his daughter, and now he's wondering, now he's one of the guys in Port Authority. I used to go to Port Authority every morning and stand next to a woman called Tina, who told me every morning that she just performed the night before with Ike. And I would talk to her every morning about how the gig went. And she said, well, I said, is Ike still hitting you? He said, he hits me sometimes. Sometimes he doesn't hit me. And I said, where do you wash? And she'd come into Port Authority and she'd use the public toilets. And she was sleeping, she was managing to find buses that she could sleep on and hide at the back of the bus. And then she'd come out and she'd line up with 5 other guys and ladies right outside Port Authority on the pavement, I'm British, on the sidewalk, and you know, stand all day long talking to themselves, shifting from side to side. That's where I got a lot of my research from, because we spent 2 weeks before we filmed, didn't we? Actually going out to some of these welfare motels, and yeah, you know, so it's very Shakespearean what we're talking about. You know, Shakespeare just puts people on stage and they act.
Right.
He's pre-Freud, doesn't need a lot of backstory, and you learn from the characters as they act. Through their actions, you learn about them. You learn they are evil. You don't tell you why they're evil. You know, they had, you know, daddy issues.
Right.
You know,
that's right.
It's pre-Freud. It just, they act, and you discover through the course of the play, through their actions. That's what's fantastic.
That's right.
What about this
film. And as heartbreaking as a movie, again, I do also find it very funny in moments. I mean, you know,
surprisingly funny.
It's surprisingly funny. It's, you know, interaction with the hotel, you know. Anyway, okay. Let's open up to the audience if anyone wants any questions.
Thank you so much. Okay, thank you so much for sharing this beautiful film with us. I've watched it many times before, but it's really intense on big screen. It's a beautiful, beautiful film. My question is for Damian. I've read one of the recent interviews of Mr. Kerrigan where he said he saw you in Band of Brothers and he was tempted to cast you in Keane. And as far as I know, Keane was also instrumental in getting you the role in Homeland, Nick Brody, which is my all-time favorite fictional character. So thank you, Keane. Thank you, Mr. Kerrigan. Do you want to give some insight to us about it?
I'm really trying to keep that quiet from he's going to start asking for checks. Yeah. No, there is a lovely little thing in there, and I'll share it. A little bit of showbiz gossip, I guess. A little industry inside scoop. Thanks, Bahar, for the question. Yes, when they were trying to cast Homeland, they were struggling to cast Brody, and it was another East Coast independent director who I admire very much called Michael Cuesta. I made a film called L.I.E. back in the day, around the same sort of time, and he had been brought on as the lead director of Homeland. And they couldn't cast Brody. They'd already got Claire, and they already had Mandy. And he said, watch this movie. I'm a huge fan of the director. It's a remarkable movie. This is Keane. It's back in the day when you still got your Netflix on a CD. And they weren't all available. Some you could get. Do you remember the time you had to either order the CD or it was uploaded already? So Alex Ganser, who wrote it, looked it up. And he told me this story later. He said, if I had had to order the CD and waited a day for it to arrive, I wouldn't have bothered. Wow. But because someone had paid for the rights for it to be already uploaded on them, I said, I sat down and watched 20 minutes of it. It was 11 o'clock at night, and I went home 90 minutes later at 1 in the morning, having watched the whole thing. And then they came and asked me to be Brody. So, thanks, Lodge. And I was then able to return the favor again. Michael Cuesta instrumental in this, when Lodge was a renowned indie filmmaker, but was not making much TV at the time. I think
it was the first TV job.
The first thing, and we said, well, everyone loved Keane, and that's why I'm here. He can obviously direct. Let's get him in for an episode. And that led, indirectly, I suppose, to the girlfriend experience, which Lodge then, show ran. So it's all just one big happy family out there.
I think in the back there. Yeah, hi. Hey,
Yeah, you guys talked a little bit about the preparation and all the workshopping you did. When you're shooting in New York, and especially at the Port Authority, there must be a lot of things that happened that you weren't able to prepare for, because just New York in general, things just happen. I was curious if that was the case when you were shooting this movie, and if anything ended up in the movie just from happenstance and things like that.
It's a really interesting question. I think there was something, at least from my memory, nothing highly unusual. It was just more really just people entering the frame. It was really like, are you making a movie? It's amazing when you have a camera and some actors, that people will walk by and go like, are you making a movie? And you're 3.5 minutes into a 4-minute take. You have no coverage. You've already done 7 takes, and they go, are you making a movie? You go, well, I was trying to. So really, I was really felt like, how can I articulate this? And I've done just a number of interviews recently, so you think it'd be relatively easy at this point. Damian and I spent time together, and then in the rehearsal process, we spent a lot of time on the locations where we were going to film. And we invited John Foster, the DP, also. So we really, and I didn't set up traditional rehearsals. I didn't stage a scene, anything like that. we just read through the material and discussed the character and improvised some scenes for the actors to really own their character and own their dialogue. And by the time we started shooting, we had spent, I think that allowed the actors, Damian and Abigail and Amy, to really, I think, understand their character and start to answer questions that actors pose themselves very early in the process. So everything was really kind of clear very early on. And when it came time to shooting, a lot of the technical questions had been answered. We definitely were discussing in-camera editing, when to pan off somebody for how long, which is very difficult, as I found out at that time.
You made some rewrites as well, even from those sessions.
Sure. Yeah, we did some rewriting. But when we started, I think we had a really unspoken communication between us, with John also. Like we really didn't talk a lot on set. There weren't a lot of questions. And I saw that Damian was in the zone very early. And all I tried to do, and particularly in Port Authority, all I really tried to do was like step out of the way. That was really it. I saw it, I saw the energy was right, and I just did my best to get the crew to focus as much as we could and to capture it as quickly as we could without having a lot of on-set banter, so in that sense, it was because we were shooting in live environments, it really lent itself to that. It was more of, I wouldn't say documentary filmmaking, but the focus, because you are in a live environment and I'm doing something crazy like shooting one shot per scene, everyone is super focused on it.
Yeah, and it's a low budget film. We had 10 background artists or 20 maybe on a good day, who we would position in behind me. So it was trying to knock out the bogeys, to use the technical term, of citizens, walking by and looking over shoulders and going, and so these 10 or 20 background artists were just rotated, literally walk out, put a different hat on, and so you could just keep the whole thing moving. I will say another thing about making these long takes. Do you remember working with Abigail, who is phenomenal, but she was an 8-9-year-old girl. How old was she? 8 or 9-year-old girl. So you do a 4-minute take. I was, boom, there, couple of takes. Abigail wasn't. So we'd have to wait for Abigail to warm up a little bit. At that point, I've gone off the boil. So for take 3, 4, and 5, he's going, Damian, can you get this together? She's really cooking now. And I was cooking early on. And so then we'd get around to, and it'd be take 6, 7, 8. And that's why the process, it was painstaking actually, wasn't it? For some of those longer scenes, we wouldn't be gelling together until later on, those later takes. Because there was there's no cut. There's no coverage to come in and out of different performances or different takes.
And then you're running 3 minutes or 3.5 minute takes. Just praying that somebody isn't going to go, are you making a movie?
Someone just gave me a signal.
That's it.
Yeah. We made a movie.
Thank you guys.
Thank you very much.